Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of A Cup of Joe. My name is Joe Escobedo, and I'm really excited on the show. We have Benny Tan. Benny is the Center of Excellence lead at BreadTalk. Thanks so much for joining us, Benny.
Thank you, Joe, for inviting me on the call. Thank you.
Yeah, no, really excited. We have a very interesting topic that I'd love to get your thoughts on. It's about transforming L&D, learning and development, during this time. And last time we spoke, you have a very systematic, phase-like approach to learning and development. So we talked about phase one being ramping up the fundamentals, how to equip people for future skill sets. And then the third is looking at the future. So things like automation, partnerships, and so on. So that's what I'd love to get your thoughts on. But I guess the first question is, how has COVID really impacted what you guys are doing in the L&D space?
Well, I think the most simple fundamental about L&D is we're talking about face-to-face training. So I think because of this COVID whole situation that's going around, the whole training platform has to be revamped, has to be changed, because most of our staff here are actually grassroots. So basically about 90%, let me reiterate, probably we're talking about 80% of the staff. They are the frontliners. So the frontliners, they are the outlet, they are the restaurants, they are the food court. So they're serving people and things like that. So it's very difficult for them to come to office to do training right now because of COVID and the number of employees that can actually go to the training centers. Yes. So it is pretty bad we are caught in that situation, challenge that we have. So I think we had to revamp and think of a different way of approach of doing training, especially how to convey message simply across to the people we call the grassroots people, who are the service crew, because you like it or not, they may not be the most literate group of people that we have. So they come from the very diverse. They come from people from pre-primary school, from secondary schools level. So we need to convey a message to them, as well as we have to revamp the whole material on an online platform in different languages to make them easier for them to understand. So that is something that we are grappling with, especially in the F&B industry. Yeah.
I think, you're not alone. As someone in kind of the L&D education space myself, I think that's one thing that a lot of my clients have had to make that shift from doing all in person over the past couple of years to doing it almost all virtually. And it is a different skill set. It is a different way of communicating in person versus, doing it virtually. And I think even for me, when I started, I was, let's say, a bit rusty because it was relatively new for me. So having, virtual sessions, doing it more, you become more comfortable, because I think, as a trainer, talking to a screen is not the most comfortable thing, especially over a long period of time. So how do you make it in a way where you feel like we're still in the same room? How do you still have that connection? Because I think that's one thing that is lacking from a lot of the virtual ones, is that in-person connection that you would feel. Obviously, it was a live session.
Yeah, I think this is a very good question you raised, because in most of them, in online platform, we have a challenge of engaging employees to make sure that they are in tune with the training. They are always covering the module contents and make sure they comprehend every single thing that we are talking about in the training for operations stuff. So one of the things that we actually did is that we actually had a big group. So we actually do a classroom size of team meeting, for example, training. Then, of course, we do have break it out to the different levels after the training, that the small group level of comprehension, in terms of where you have the operations manager coming back to in a Zoom meeting, in a call, in a separate day, say, hey, we had a training on the other day. Do you understand what was being conducted? Let's do a quick recap. I think this is the best that we can do in a situation that we can't do face-to-face, especially when we had such a challenging environment that per se right now. So I think what our KPI is basically very realistic in terms of that. We are not really looking at 100% penetration rate in terms of online platform. The reason why is that there will all be people who may not be able to use the mobile platform, may not be able to operate Zoom, may not be able to operate Teams. But I think what we have a KPI is that at least we meet about 60% to 70% of the audience that are able to comprehend, are able to go online, be able to convey the message, communication across. That's what we're looking at.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that's a very good point, because there's different aspects of education and knowledge, one of which is actually attending and absorbing it. The other is what you talked about, the refreshers, making sure that they actually
Yep.
absorb what they were taking in, and not just kind of listening or just kind of letting it play in the background. So I think that is a good point in terms of having those regular follow-ups or catch-ups, just to make sure that the messaging or the key points stuck with them. Otherwise, it's very easy. We're inundated with all kinds of webinars and online training and stuff like that, that in one ear, out the other ear. So I think that refreshers are very, very important.
That's right. I think one of the important things is to curate the right training modules for the employees. So it's very targeted, it's very relevant to, let's say, for the frontline staff, we're looking at, for example, the basic food hygiene, looking at the food safety causes, for example. That's targeted for them on a daily basis, because this is very integral to their duties, for example. This is something that they need to do. So another part of it is that we do have a group of employees that they staggered in coming back to work because of the whole COVID situation. We had to close down on certain outlets because the mall is closed down. So when we phase in these employees back to work, they may be a bit disjointed in terms of the operations, in terms of how the company functions, in terms of company values. So there will be refreshers in terms of the area targeted at that area as well, in terms of, hey, what is the company doing? BreadTalk, what's BreadTalk doing? Core business. It's actually bringing back the employee back to the frame of mind, say, hey, you're back at work. This is what you do. This is what BreadTalk stands for. Now, I think that helps you to bring you across from where you probably had to be put on a furlough for a while. Now you're back at work and you're fully operational with the right mind frame work, and as well as in terms of on your hands what you need to do in terms of the safety measures as well.
I think you bring up a really good point, and it goes back to the question of how do you pick the right module? And I think this is a question on every L&D's head. So what is your guys' approach? I mean, this kind of goes into equipping people with the right skill sets, but how do you make sure that you have the right modules that match to those skill sets?
Well, I think it's important to identify a few key categories of people. For example, the outlet staff, the outlet crew, of course, you get HQ crews as well. So there are modules that you can apply throughout to the outlet and the non-outlet staff, which is the HQ staff, which I highlighted, for example, the orientation piece, reorientating people into the company after the long furlough, for example. Now, of course, you have another need that we talk about, which is the outlet, which I've highlighted earlier, which is something critical, which is the basic food hygiene and the food safety. That's something that is very critical on the operational staff. Now, coming back to another thing that we probably I jumped the gun a bit, but to talk about the training for the HQ staff, what is they need to be equipped with? I think some things that they need equipped with, for example, it's how to be resilient in, for example, in workspace in a challenging environment like right now in COVID. How is it to manage change in an environment where you don't have employees or your colleagues are not around, they still work on a staggered shift? How do you actually adapt to the kind of new environment? Mentoring, for example, is important because a lot of employees will feel that, I'm not back at work, I'm a working silo, I don't have the community. How do the senior people, for example, I'm not talking about seniors and senior management, but people who are been long enough in the company, how do they mentor, for example, a staff who have just joined the company and say, hey, how to actually mitigate all this uncertainties and this insecurities in this period of time where you don't have your staff here next to you, your colleagues next to you, for example. So these are some of the curated trainings that we have split between, for example, the outlet staff, the HQ staff, and we also identify what is actually needs to be across the board to all employees in Singapore.
Now, when you were speaking, you sparked a new idea for me. And I think it was around mentorship, because you think of like traditional L&D, you think of like, traditional workshops, but then I guess layering that with mentorships as well to almost have like a buddy system. So for example, if you're going through a program together, to make sure that each of the people are, applying what they do. Is it just an idea that just popped into mind when you were talking? Yeah. Because it goes back to, once again, getting people to learning is one, getting them to actually implement it is an entirely different thing. So I think that in conjunction with the traditional workshops, kind of mentoring comes into place, and it helps once again dive a bit deeper and also help people accountable for some of the things you talked about.
Yeah, Joe, you're right to say that, because I was thinking very hard whether to use the word coaching. Coaching may not be the right word, because coach is about the skills. If you
Yeah.
talk about counseling, counseling is more on a psychological basis. It's not that. It's more like feeling that you're in a community. It's about, hey, we're this buddy system, that you're not
Mm.
alone. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very good point. Once again, it just sparked my conversation with you. So thank you for for giving me an insight right there. Um, I guess once again,
Varies.
you talked about kind of the first step is for the just differentiating between the two, those who are at HQ and those who are in the kind of ground level, and making sure the ground level have obviously now more than ever the ramping up hygiene, personal, health and safety and stuff like that. All of that has to be done. And you talk about kind of the HQ. Um, I guess your question is, how do you balance between future skill sets, internal versus external? So by external, I mean things that are impacted, like the macroeconomic things like COVID, versus internally, where you know that the department or teams need to make a shift in something. How do you balance between the two when you're deciding future skill sets and L&D programs in general?
Well, to be honest with you, Joe, this is not really something that we talk about rocket science. It's basically a lot of getting the sentiment of knowing, of having the filler. I mean, it's a little bit abstract and tangible, but apology for that. But I feel a lot of things about getting to the ground and understand and look at them, and you have a conversation with them and know that what is something that they need at this point in time. So a lot of things that when we drive a training or L&D program, it is not, it's two prongs. One, it's for the interest of the company. That's the basis, the baseline.
Yeah.
But we have to think of the interest of the employee as well, because we're talking about how we are sustaining the job as well. So if they don't have, for example, coming back topic, we talk about, if we don't have the resilience,
Mhm.
they're not adapted to the change in the organization, managing changes, they will be eventually sidelined in this whole progress of the organization change. We're not just talking about BreadTalk, we're talking about the whole environment as a whole. It's the same thing when we talk about operations as well. So things that we need to know what is critical at this point in time. Because if you don't do certain critical causes, we talk about causes that, like, for example, basic food hygiene, we come back to that because that's something we like to highlight as critical. The whole outlet or the whole operation can be shut down, and the whole company can be shut down because they're not able to manufacture bread and they're not able to produce their products. So this is something that's essential. So coming back to what you brought is, how do we balance it? It's a lot of things coming back. It's not just the work of L&D. Number one, it's the work with negotiation, talking with the senior management, what they want to head towards the direction, where do you want to go in terms of sustainability, in terms of nature of the business, where is it in the season right now? Are we in post-COVID? Are we in pre-COVID? Where are we going to take to survive in this whole business climate right now? You face it, you like it or not, you face it. I think F&B is going through a very difficult a time of challenge of full transformation business. I think that's where we have to sit down and think of things very differently, how to actually have the sustainability of an employee in an organization. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's the next point is you talked about kind of not only making it obviously for the organization, but making it for the individual. But part of making it for the individual is, getting them to shift or change the mindset. It's always the most challenging, but most crucial part of L&D education is, not only a skill
That's
set,
right.
how do you get them to think different? And once again, this is something that I'd love to get your thoughts in terms of, how do you get going, even using resilience as an example, going from, maybe doing virtual or sorry, to in-person to virtual now, how do you get them to shift that mindset in terms of a different way of doing work?
Yeah, I think it's a lot to do with about influencing and convincing, and that this is a whole genre whereby we no longer can dictate what people need to do, not like in many years back where we tell someone to do something, they'll do it. I think it's a lot of convincing, a lot of influencing. Number one, we tell them this is, for example, it's important. There is no face-to-face courses for you to do food hygiene, for example.
Yeah.
And you need to have that certification. You don't have that certification, you're not able to operate in the outlet. And what's next for you as an employee is the question, right? So they are somewhat compelled to do this on an online module in the sense of that. Of course, we don't force them, but they need to go it online to get a recertification, for example. So the shift of mindset, I would say it comes in two prongs. One is in a way they need to do it. It's a mandatory, they are compelled, quote unquote, to do it because it's part of their job description, it's part of the job scope. They need to have the certification. Now, there's another group of people we talked about earlier on, let's say the HQ staff, they don't need certification. Now, this group of people, of course, is more difficult to convince because this is something to do with the mindset shift change. So where we approach towards is that we will pitch it and say that, look, we are moving into the very different situation right now. This is actually a COVID situation, it's not like how normal business operate, right? So we actually tell them and say, hey, this is actually very good for you in terms of the season because you're actually experiencing this in your work level. For example, you are right now before that you were handling just work in your workspace. Now you're working from home, you have to handle your family, your children, your in-laws, how to be resilient in that space, how to be mindful in that space, how to practice that change of environment in that space. I know it sounds a little bit abstract at this point when we convey this message across to the employees, but I think we need to find that point that touches the sensitive soft spot in the area of their heart, where to say that, okay, I think this is really realistic, this is really relevant to me, this is really relevant to my situation, my current pain point right now. And I think this is something that I would willing to go ahead with this training, the mindset change. Realistically, of course, we are targeting, coming back to that, we are targeting about maybe 50 to 60% realistically. Ideally, I think we still have a long gap to actually cover to reach 80% or 90% to make them full converts. But I think we do have a good pickup rate for this group of people who go through this changes.
Yeah, once again, Benny, you're giving me so many different ideas that are sparking in my head. I'm listening to every word you're saying. There's new ideas. And one thing that I was envisioning when you were talking is kind of a matrix in terms of convincing and influencing. So you have, on one side, you have the timeliness. So you talked about if it's very relevant to me now, then I'm a higher likelihood of actually, embarking on whatever you want me to do. The other is, you talked about it briefly, is, I guess, what's in it for them type of approach. So there's two approaches. There's the carrot and the stick. And I think there's no wrong or right. So for example, the stick is, if you don't take this program, you don't do it, then obviously you'll get laid off, lose out on these opportunities. The carrot side is you open up new opportunities for you within the organization. So I think by having, once again, in my mind, a matrix of timeliness along with what's in it for them, whether it's a carrot or stick, you can kind of map in terms of how likely they are to actually, embark on what you're trying to get them to do. So once again, you're getting me thinking, Benny. You're keeping me hot this. Get my brain fluffing this morning.
That's great. That's great.
And once again, I think in terms of the carrot and the stick, do you have an opinion one way or the other? Like, which one have you seen better? Like, going back to influencing and convincing, you talked about, the mandatory ones, like, we don't do it, obviously, there's a potential that you'll get laid off. Do you find that has a stronger push for people versus, like, if you do this, then you will open up all these new opportunities within the organization?
Well, I think very much comes back to the culture base of the organization, or the culture base of the setting of where we are in. I can speak for the other companies, but I think in BreadTalk Group, I think the culture-wise is that we predominantly our workforce is we have a very aged group of workforce in the front line. In HQ staff, we are pretty young staff. We are pretty young group of people. So our approach is basically a two-pronged approach. There are approaches that we need to deliver something that's mandatory across to especially to the frontliners. This is something that it's non-negotiable because this is something that it's a bread and butter of business.
Yeah.
It hits a P&L.
Yeah.
So that is something that's non-negotiable. Whereas compared to HQ stuff, it's the culture again. It's where we are because we are set up with people with a millennia, with people who are from the baby boomers and things like that. So they like options. When they like options, it's basically then it's about the power of how to influence, how to sell your ideas, how to market, and how to brand your L&D programs and say, this is important to you at this era because it helps you, it benefits you. If they resonate with that, they'll say, okay, Benny, let's do this. If they don't resonate, that's fine. We will need to think of another way how to remarket it and how to brand it in a way that's receptive to them. So the market the stuff is very diverse because it's nothing, it's not mandatory. So it's how you play with the influencing, how you play with the branding to attract them to say that this is something relevant to me, that's something beneficial to me. Yeah.
It's so funny, Benny. I as you know, I don't come from a HR background. I come from marketing sales background. But honestly, the more I speak with HR professionals, the more I realize I see the similarities between marketing and sales. I think it's a beautiful example of what you just talked about. It's, even for the kind of the L&D heads I'm currently working with, at the end of the day, they have to sell in their programs to the different stakeholders. It's not enough for them to have an idea. They have to sell it into the different, business heads. Only then, if business heads get, tick the box, can they actually implement their program. So it actually has an impact in terms of what they're doing. So it goes back to, that marketing. How do you position it? How do you sell it in a way that's going to get your business head to agree to it? Otherwise, you don't have a program, and obviously you don't have a program, you don't have a job. So I think, once again, so many similarities, I think, to what we've been doing for the past couple of years with marketers and salespeople is very much applicable to, I think, HR and L&D. So once again, very, very, very similar.
It is, Joe. I agree. It is. A lot of things got to do with marketing, a lot of things to do with selling products. Yeah.
Yeah. Once again, so many to do angles. So I'm really, really glad we had this interview. One more thing I want to get your thoughts on, and this is, I guess, looking towards the future. And I guess it goes back to the question, how do you stay on top of the things in the future? Because we talked about things like automation and collaborating with different partners like Grab Foods and others. How do you really make sure that you're staying ahead of the game, or at least you're anticipating some of the things that are coming up?
Well, I think a lot of things is really to engaged with the young people. The young people really have a lot of ideas and thoughts. That is one thing. The second thing is that I'm glad that we have this catalyst, which is the COVID. The whole COVID has created the whole situation where we had a slew of pipeline of ideas that we had. And the COVID just triggered the whole thing, and we had a whole initiative that rolled out in terms of the L&D space. So, I mean, I remember we had a previous conversation before, and we said that, you were asking and said, what were the programs initiated you have for the future? I said, we have it in our bag, in our pockets, but we couldn't roll it out because they didn't see the relevance in the environment, because they say, hey, everything seems to be pretty good. Let's hold it. But now with the whole COVID thing, it whole triggers this whole slew of initiatives that's coming out in the L&D space. Now, that is, we're still talking about existing. Now, your question, of course, you were saying about what's moving forward for us. So this whole moving forward for us thing was really, really very interesting, because this whole COVID thing caused us to really say, hey, we need to move ahead of the game right now, because everyone is into the F&B space. We are aware of many F&B industries, many F&B outlets. They are closing down and right over in Singapore, and a lot of them are struggling. So the question is that, are we going to operate in a very fundamental, conventional way? What's next? It's the going on the digital platform, the current state or the future state. I would say this is the current state right now. But what's the future state? That's something that I can't answer. I don't have the answer for that, but I think that is something that the senior management team is coming reconvene and say, hey, let's not just look at what we are looking right now using, for example, GrabFood or Food Panda or what food delivery businesses that you have. What is the next level that we talk about? That opens up a whole spectrum of new opportunities that we didn't talk about, we didn't explore before. So this is something that they are talking. They're looking at this space to say that, hey, what's going to happen in the next 5 years? But I have no
Yeah,
preview in terms of strategy.
I think that makes perfect sense. So it sounds like it's a combination of striking a balance between, what is the C-suite see as the business vision or the strategies, but also you bring up a very good point in terms of what are some of the younger audience, what do they bring in terms of ideas. So even for me, I've been doing this for several years, and I always learn something when I teach at some of the universities. So I taught it. I did a session at SMU, I think a couple of years ago, and they were teaching me things about new technologies they were using, and I was like, why did I think about using this earlier? So I think to your point, yeah, it's important to strike the balance between business vision coming from the top and also the younger the younger generation injecting new ideas and creativity in terms of what you're already doing. Hopefully that strikes a balance in terms of answering that question.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm glad that even in an organization right now, they do have task force, for example, they do get people from different functions who are young. They form a task force, and I think the chairman actually do have this idea to say, hey, look, we're going to take our business in the next direction. Let's have the young people have a say in the business. So I think that was a very good move forward. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Benny, there have been so many unique perspectives and new ideas that I'm jotting down in my head. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share them with us today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you.
My pleasure. And if you enjoyed today's interview with Benny, please feel free to share it with anyone in the HR, L&D, or even the sales and marketing space. A lot of practical tips in terms of getting your message across. So thank you so much, and we will see you again soon. Take care, everyone.